Hello, this is Colin Goble. This tutorial is going to show you how to use Microsoft Visual Studio.net to compile and execute a C++ program for the purposes of this class. In my case, I'm using Microsoft Visual Studio.net 2003, although I think 2005 works in a quite similar manner. So we'll launch Microsoft Visual Studio.net 2003. We'll wait for it to fire up, and here's the opening page. Now I want to start a brand new project. Say I'm working on one of the homework assignments. So I'll go to File, New, and in this case, unlike Bloodshed, but here we're going to have to create a new project. A wizard starts up. It asks us what kind of project we want. We want a Visual C++ project, and we need a Win32 console project. You need to do both of those. In this case, I'm going to call my project Visual Studio Demo, and I've got to, excuse me, I have to find a location on the hard disk in which to put it. I'm going to put it in a folder called CS161 on my C drive. I'll click OK. The wizard then takes me to a second page, and it's very important here that I click on the Application Settings tab. We need a console application, but we also need to be certain that we check the box marked Empty Project. This is really important, otherwise Microsoft Visual Studio will put in some Microsoft-specific code, and that will mean that your program is no longer portable to other non-Microsoft environments. Be sure, therefore, to click Empty Project. Okay, we're done with the wizard. I'll click the Finish button. And at this point, I have a project called VS Demo. Visual Studio has automatically created another thing known as a solution, which happens to have the same name, VS Demo. And the solution contains one project. So we have one solution called VS Demo, which contains one project called VS Demo. All of your work this term will probably be the same, will go the same way. You'll have one project per solution, and every time you start a new project, Visual Studio will automatically create a new solution for you. You don't have to do things that way. Visual Studio is much more flexible than that, but I recommend that's the way you do it this term. Now we have some empty source files, header files, and resource files. We need to create a new source file. So I'm going to right-click on source file. I'm going to add a new item. And the item that I want to add is a C++ file. And I'm going to give that file a name. Let's call it Hello. So in my Visual Studio Demo folder, that's the project folder in CS161, we're going to create a file called hello.cpp. Going to click Open. There's the file, and right now it's empty because we created an empty project. Now I'm going to use the same code we used earlier for Bloodshed, so I already have it in the clipboard. I'm going to paste it in here to avoid a lot of typing. It's the Hello Name program, and I haven't made any changes from the Visual Studio version of the project. The next thing we need to do is compile this application. We need to convert it from the C++ source code format into the binary executable format, the machine readable format known as machine code that our computer is going to execute. There are several ways to do that, but one of the ways we'll do it is we will build the project VS Demo. So I'm going to go to the Build menu, and I'm going to build VS Demo. And down here we get the output of the build process. If there are any error messages, they would have appeared in this window. In this case, there are no errors, so the window is empty. And now we're ready to test our program. So the quickest way to test our program is to go to the button here, the Start button. I'm going to click that button, and the program asks me to enter my last name, which was Goble. I'll enter my first name, which was Colin, and it presents the welcome message. I'm going to press Q and enter, and the program terminates. Now, at this point, you have a working application. Let's go look in the CS161 folder. In CS161, there's VS Demo. If I open that, you'll see there's a lot of files in there. The important ones, there's the source file, hello.cpp. That's the file you need to turn in for grading. And by the way, in the debug folder is the program vsdemo.exe. So I won't spend any time now discussing the other files. Those are the two important ones. There's your source code in hello.cpp. And as I said, there's the vsdemo.exe is in the debug folder. Okay, well, that's really all there is to it. Of course, you're likely perhaps to make some sort of mistake when you run your application. Let's assume, for example, that you perhaps forget a semicolon on that line there. So if I try and run the program now, I have two ways to do this. I can either build it again, or I can just run it. If I just press the Start button, Visual Studio automatically knows that we need to rebuild the application because we made a change to the source code. So we'll tell it we'd like to build it. I'll click the Yes button. And once again, Visual Studio goes through the build process. This time there are errors. It's asking me if I want to continue. There's no point in continuing because there are errors in the application. I have to fix the errors first. So I'll select No. At this point, the error message or messages appear down here in the Build Error task list. There's only one. If I click this, it tells me there's a missing semicolon before the identifier Cout. And if I double click on the error message, then Visual Studio highlights the line or lines that are close to the error. It doesn't always get it exactly right. In this case, it's almost exactly spot on. It says there's a missing semicolon before this Cout. I'll enter that semicolon. I'll fix the compilation error. And now we'll try this again. So we'll start the program. We have to rebuild it because we changed the source code. I'll select yes. It recompiles. This time there were no errors, and my program should work satisfactorily. So everything works okay, and that concludes my demo of how to compile and build an application using Visual Studio. Thank you.